Hello, everybody. This is Debbie Spoons, and we are on CaveNet NSS webinar series. Tonight, Tom Evans and I are going to be giving you a web presentation that was given at ITER's International Technical Rescue Symposium. Now, Tom speaks there a lot. He's there every year because he's very prolific at a lot of the research and other things that go into dealing with cave rescue. So he's got a huge background, and I wanted him to be here to help answer questions because he's got a great background. But we're going to go ahead and go on and start with our, oh, and Tom, would you like to give a little bit about yourself? I forgot to pull up your bio, so can you give them some of your background on SAR cubes and other things?
Sure. So I'm a avid caver and canyoneer. I try to do research and testing on rescue systems and rescue hardware and software as part of my nonprofit, and just in general because it's the right thing to do. And I kind of started doing this back in 2009, 2010, because I was at some trainings and people asked me a bunch of questions about how systems operated, and I didn't know the answers. And so I just started doing some testing, and I've been testing ever since. So I would say that, like, for the most part, I'm not some sort of encyclopedia of knowledge of knowing everything when it comes to rescue, but I have a pretty decent idea of what the testing data is. So if you have questions, I'm happy to give you answers about the testing data and the testing research. I am an NCRC instructor, so that is my association with the caving community. And it looks like someone is saying that they can't hear us. Debbie, are you there? Because I'm not hearing anyone now either.
Can you hear me?
Can't hear you now, yes.
Okay, let's go ahead and start one more time. Alex, our wonderful webmaster, can edit this. So we're going to do 3 count, and we're going to start one more time because GoToWebinar is just overwhelmed with worldwide problems. So we're going to do 3 count, start one more time. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, 1, 2, 3, start the webinar. Hello, everybody. This is Debbie Spoons, NSS Webinar Chair, and we are here to talk about above ground rescue and below ground rescue. My co-host tonight is Tom Evans. And hi. Tell him just a quick bit about yourself, and then we're going to launch right into the presentation. So, Tom, go ahead.
Awesome. So my name is Tom Evans. I am a caver and canyoneer. And my association with kind of ropes and rescue and rigging is that I've been volunteering with above and below ground rescue for almost 15 years now. Actually, I think it is 15 years now. And I started a nonprofit a few years ago to do a bunch of research and testing on rope rescue systems. So my understanding of ropes and rigging is kind of experimental and is based in testing and testing data. So I don't know everything, and I wouldn't consider my comments to be gospel, but they're at least informed. And so that's why I'm kind of here, just to kind of give you a different perspective on above versus below ground rescue based on testing data.
Okay, awesome. All right, this webinar this presentation, I gave at ITERS, International Technical Rescue Symposium, a couple of years ago. However, Tom does presentations there every single year of his research and his studies and other things. And I asked him to come help me, especially answer a lot of these questions. He has a lot of the technical data that I don't have. I've been search and rescue for 8 years. And before that, I've taken several NCR classes, but I'm not an instructor. But I just have this passion to help SAR units, search and rescue, understand that underground rescue, cave rescue is very much different than above rescue. I've taken many high angle rescue classes and been on search and rescue, mountain rescue, cave rescue, water rescue, etc. for a very long time. But there's a major difference, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight, is a major difference. So surface rescue versus cave rescue. And the question is, what are the differences? The differences that you can, now, most everybody on this call is or have been cavers. We do have some SAR members on here, and we welcome you. But what we're going to talk about is kind of the differences. Mostly, this is a little more towards cavers because this is for our caver community. But if you look at your left picture, that's one of our high alpine rescues. If you look at your right picture, that's a pretty typical, practice for a cave rescue. But before we go too deep, pun intended, into the subject, let's look at where the typical caver goes. Where do cavers go, and where would you expect to have to rescue them from? As you look at these pictures, what I'd like you to think of is, how would I get the patient out of that cave? What equipment would I need to use, or my team need to use? Where would we get this kind of equipment? What experience and skills would be needed to be able to use equipment and be able to get in and out of the cave safely? What resources do you have to be able to perform an underground rescue? Where would you get these resources? Does your team have the training, skills, knowledge, and experience to safely and efficiently work in these kind of conditions? This is a lot of thoughtful questions. These are just a few, and I didn't put the real scary pictures. These are just a few of the places that cavers go. That's my 6'2" boy that when he was little, seeing some of the small places that we go. These are just, cavers are notorious for going into small places, small holes. What's there? What's behind that? Where does it lead? Where are we going? That's just the way we're wired. There's a hole that we got to figure out where it's going. If you look at some of these pictures, that literally, the one on the left is the angle that he's crawling through. It was on an angle like that. Another thing, entrances. Trying to figure out how to get your team and your equipment through these entrances. These are also entrances to caves. Now, they are bigger on the inside, but the outside, not really that big. These are just things to look at and think, how would you navigate your team safely in and out? How would you get your patient or patients safely in and out? Another thing to think about is crack and crevice rescues. They can be tight and scary, and they need specialized training and understanding. Now, the thing that a lot of people aren't aware of, as many of us as cavers know, is you don't know what you don't know. And it's hard to explain to somebody this sentence unless they've been in one of those situations where you're like, oh, if I'd only known. You don't know what you don't know until you have the training, the knowledge, the experience to know what you're up against and to know what you don't know. Surface rescue and cave rescue, there are many, many differences. I'm going to go through several. We're going to try and touch all of them all the way through. Environmental differences, medical care, movement, equipment, rigging. Oh, I went too far. Sorry about that. Okay. Communication, philosophical difference between above ground and below ground. Extreme tight spaces. OSHA does not cover caves. OSHA will not touch caves. They are man-made structures, mines, shafts, anything made, fine. But OSHA will not touch caves. It is a natural occurring place. The stress of being hundreds of feet underground. Lack of anchoring points. Unless you have the training and the understanding experience, try to find an anchor underground. If you're used to anchors above ground, will just kind of bend your mind a little trying to figure out what to do with it. Confined space techniques do not work well in caves. They're great for confined spaces, but caves are not the traditional confined space. You have complete and utter darkness, not like going out in the wilderness and shutting your light off, but total darkness. Okay, and you've got cold, muddy, wet. There's lakes, waterfalls, and rivers, which a lot of above ground people don't know that we have lakes and waterfalls and rivers hundreds of feet underground. And all systems must be extremely compact and space saving. And more rescuers are needed for moving patients through the tight areas and through some of the more difficult areas because of the different techniques we use to get them moving. Now, being hundreds of feet underground, if you are not used to it, can be really scary. In fact, your brain can play all kinds of tricks on you. We have seen people, some really awesome, just very adept and knowledgeable search and rescue people, but you get them underground and the stress of being underground, they're just barely functioning. We've seen paramedics underground that could not remember how to do blood pressure, take a blood pressure, that were having trouble even just taking a pulse because their brain is having trouble with the stress of them being underground and the stress of trying to function underground. You don't know what you don't know until you suddenly get down there and your mind starts playing all kinds of tricks on you. Many times only one or two rescuers can reach a patient at a time. If you look at these photos, you can see you're not going to be able to get a lot of rescuers in there. Sometimes you're lucky to get one person in there. Larger rescuers may not even be able to fit in a cave at all, let alone to get to the patient. We use non-common methods for moving patients, or non-standard methods. What normal search and rescue use, what I've explained, some of the things that we use for underground, I get blank stares. But again, you don't know what you don't know. Once you understand why the techniques like that are used, you understand how efficient they are and how much better they work than trying to use above ground techniques, moving people underground. Another thing is most equipment won't fit into gates or entrances. If you look at this one on the right, no, that rock does not come out. That is a monster rock. Even if you strip the gate off, which would be really difficult, there's not a lot of area to get big, huge packs in or big, huge equipment in. It's difficult to trade rescuers out. If you look on the right, you look at that, you're not going to be able to be moving rescuers in and out very much. There's very little room for patient assessment or little room even to move the rescuers or the patients. If you know the search and rescue, we're never to step over a patient, never. Well, in cave rescue, not only do you step over your patient, You crawl over your patient. Sometimes, depending on where they are, you may have to crawl under your patient. You do whatever it takes to get them above ground because their best chance of survival is above ground. So we break a lot of above ground protocols because we need to get them above ground. Okay, patient assessment, very little room for that. You just sometimes have just enough room to get the patients on the extraction device. And we don't have pictures of the really, really tight places because sometimes they're so tight, there's no room to take pictures. Okay? Sometimes you have to wait and do your patient assessment when they're out of the space. It's just the way it is. It can take many hours just to get to a patient, let alone assess them or etc. I mean, just to find them. Cave rescue can literally take days or weeks to accomplish, depending on the complexity and the extraction route. A lot of us know and have read about some of the rescues that take days or weeks or longer. Overseas, they literally put the doctors down with the patients. Cave rescue can take quite a bit. Now, one of the rules of thumb is and I thought I had a slide on this, for every 10 minutes a person walks into a cave, it takes roughly an hour or more to get them out if they can't move on their own. Now we're going to talk about personal gear and equipment. Each cave rescuer should have their own supplies for a minimum of 12 hours. And that includes a good solid helmet, 3 sources of light that mount on the helmet, no handheld lights. You have lots of extra batteries. You have appropriate clothing, no cotton. You guys all know cotton kills. Appropriate footwear, food, water, gloves. Got to have gloves. Knee and elbow pads. A small pack, boots, tea bottle, burrito bottle, etc. These are things that are necessary for helping out a rescue. Now, different packs, if you look at the left, these are typical packs for cavers for rescue. You look on the right, that's pretty typical search and rescue packs. In fact, our winter packs are quite a bit larger than that. And there's no way you're going to get that into most caves. And if you can get it in the entrance, you're not going to get it very far. It's too big. And the left is an example of not exactly what you want to be moving through a cave. And on the right is a suego. A lot of cavers use them. That's a type of a bag. It just shows how much smaller that they need to be. Some equipment won't fit through the gates. We talked about that, or through some of the constrictions. Some of the different patient transportation equipment, we have what's called a furno, the one on the right. It'll slide. It doesn't have the metal like the regular litters that have like the metal mesh that catch rocks and get stuck on things. This will slide. It can leave little sheds of itself, or we call them carrot shavings, as it goes through. A sked, which is the one on the right, kind of like making a human taco. It's very flexible, can roll up, but you always use an OSS, an organ spine split, with a sked to protect your patient's shoulders and back. And there's drag sheets, which is something you're not going to find above ground. Drag sheets, sometimes there is just no way to get a patient out of such a small area. We have to use a drag sheet. Example, many years ago, Bill Fritz got himself way back in Lehman's, and we had to do a mock rescue. He was so far back in such a small area, we had to put him on a sheet, drag him, and then we had to have him turn his head to the side so that we could get him underneath there, because his head, we'd had to take off his whole nose and everything. So the differences of above ground rescue, you would never dream of doing that. But the best hope for your patient on the ground is to get them out. You have to do what you have to do to get them above ground for their help. Another big difference is surface, cave to surface communication. I've heard Andy Armstrong say cave communication can be summed up in 3 words: bad, bad, and bad. And he's correct. Radios don't work in caves. The best method is the old military phones. As you see on the right, they're solid, they're pretty caver-proof, and they work. On your left, you'll see runners. They're stringing wire through the cave so that we can hook up the phone, and then rescuers at a certain point can talk to IC up above. Now, due to the serious communication difficulties of cave rescue, I mean, the communication is poor. The usual top-down command structure that is used for above-ground rescuers can prove to be very problematic and very inefficient when you're trying to use it for cave rescue. If you look at this is a cave in Germany, you see there's a long distance from where you're going to pick up your patient if they're down by the lake, and help, which is on top, which is where you want, you always want your patients to get, is out. So the above ground rescue versus below ground rescue is really important. Now, in cave rescue, we have what's called the bottom-up command structure. That's proven to be much more effective during cave rescue because a lot of times ICS will start at the top, but as your grid search is happening and they're trying to narrow down where the patient is, they may be moved inside. In fact, a lot of times they are moved inside, especially if you have a person that's way down deep inside. So they will be inside the cave. It's easier for them to communicate, and they're closer to the situation. For those of you that are non-cavers, if you look on the right, there's a 3D model of a cave called Bloomington, which is in southern Utah. It is a 5-level maze, awesome cave, but what a mess if you don't know where you're going or how to get where you're going to be able to get to your patient. Moving your team and your moving your rescuers and the patient through caves, big difference. For the general rule is, like I said a few minutes ago, for every 10 minutes that a person walks into a cave, it's taken more than an hour to transport them out. The person can't come out on their own accord. Most cave trips, minimum 3 hours. I mean, usually in caves for a long time, 10 hours or more. So when you start adding that up, and this is for experienced cavers, this is for people who know what they're doing to get them out. When you have people who aren't used to being underground, who aren't used to navigating themselves underground, you're adding a lot more onto that. So rescues could be very, very long. Different personal vertical gear. We as cavers have much different gear than above ground rescue. Have you been on both? I can tell you that our search and rescue teams are awesome. They're wonderful. But they don't have the knowledge and understanding that most vertical cavers do. Most vertical cavers have much more sophisticated and complex understanding of SRT, single rope technique, than a lot of search and rescue people do, because it's mandatory. There's many techniques for above ground just don't work underground. Like our harnesses, a caver harness and climbing system is much different than a regular climbing harness. Rappel devices, racks versus other devices. A figure 8, seldom used because it twists the rope. We have pencil stops and lots of other items. Caving harnesses. The difference between a caving harness and a regular harness, a climbing harness, or an industrial harness is that we have a very low attachment point, very low. And the reason it's low is so that our ascending system will fit and it doesn't jam on rope. If you look at the climbing harness on the right, see how high that attachment is. And when you look at our caving on the left, you see how low it is. So by the time you put your ascending system on, it hits in the throat and it doesn't twist the rope and jam you up on rope, and then you're a casualty needing to rescue yourself or someone else to rescue you while you're trying to help a patient. There's different types of ascending systems. The one that's mostly used in the West is called the frog. There's a Mitchell, the Texas rope walker, and there's all kinds of hybrids. But this is the one that is generally used in the West. When you get back to the caves in the Midwest, they use different systems because they have much longer pits, whereas we're in the West, we'll descend, walk, crawl, descend, walk, crawl. So it's just different types of caves. Now, rigging underground presumes that you're a competent SRT, single rope techniques. You have to be competent rigging, movement on your rigging. You have to understand how to use rebelays. You know how to cross knots, traverses, changeovers, crossovers, and to efficiently ascend. Tom and I, several years ago, were at MRA, Mountain Rescue Association up in Washington State. We were teaching some basic diminishing loop techniques, and it was search and rescue were really, really good at rappelling, but a lot of search and rescue are not as adept to efficiently and quickly ascend a rope. And when you've got lives on the line and your team's life on the line, the ascending is not so good. So that is something that is really different. Many techniques from high angle rescue just simply don't work and are not applicable to caves. I've taken many classes on high angle rescue, been involved in them, and it's a totally different universe. Rigging. Ropes are at a premium, rope space. We have small knots, very small bites. Systems are set up really small to reduce space. Hauling, you don't have as much room to reset. You have compact systems. Things are totally different underground. Counterbalances. You have climbing counterbalances, rappelling counterbalances, diminishing loop counterbalancing. These are things that Tom's very adept at. He has done a lot of research on these type of things. Extremely limited anchor points. This is lava tubes up in Pacific Northwest. And what we learned is how to take little tiny cracks and be able to set up a good system out of numerous small, tiny anchors to be able to efficiently haul, a person and a rescuer. Also, the lack of normal good anchor points, alternative anchoring systems commonly used underground are extending anchors, stemples, dead men, human anchors, which most of us call meat anchors. Medical care. Sometimes there's no place for patient assessment. As I said before, it's just not something that you just have room for. It's pretty tight, as you can look at that. Sometimes you just have to realize that you have to do with what you have. Excuse me. And all right, Tom, you want to finish up with this, and that way they can hear you talk for a little while?
I mean, if you would like. Do I have control over the slides?
I will give that to you, because that way they can listen to someone besides me. And Tom can finish up, because we're getting into some of the more critical stuff. Especially, we're going to be talking about cave maps, and we're going to be talking about other important situations, and get into NCRC stuff that Tom can explain, because he's an NCRC instructor. So excuses just for 1 second while we do this changeover. This is our apologies for this, but having two people talk instead of listen to me, continue to talk. Because you hear me talk all the time when I'm on the webinars, and I was concerned that maybe you guys would get tired of hearing me talk. So Tom is going to take over. In fact, if you want, Tom, you can just talk off my screen, and I can forward it for you.
Okay. So I actually can't see the slides anymore.
Well, that's okay. I can fix that. I have the technique. All right, so here we go. Medical care.
Awesome.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so medical care, above ground and below ground, is a little bit different. And there are kind of two big things that are an issue here. One is that above ground, you have a lot more flexibility, right? Let's just say that you're hiking outside and you sprain your ankle. You've got lots of options. You can bring an ATV in there, maybe you need a snow machine, or maybe you need a helicopter to pull someone out, or maybe there can be a rope rescue team, or you can carry someone out in a litter. Those options aren't available underground, right? Because of the reduction in space and the fact that there's a roof over the head, right? So the medical care of the patient changes because you can't get as much stuff underground. The other issue here is that the environment itself will have a tendency to harm the patient, right? If you break your ankle underground, it's not your broken ankle that will hurt you, it's the fact that the environment of the cave will hurt you. Above ground, usually the environment isn't going to kill you, right? Unless you're in like a whiteout conditions or you're in a canyon in a rapidly rising water. For the most part, you have time, right? In a cave, that environment will slowly suck the energy out of you, reducing your ability to cope with that environment, right? So the medical care underground really has to deal with these two things. One is the lack of space and access, and the other one is the environment itself, right? So getting to the patient to assess them and the treatment have to change, okay? And that is often a problem because it's just not a lot of space. And so one thing that will occur is that because that environment is hostile, sometimes you got to move the patient first before you can do treatment. Things like if they're laying in water, sometimes the right thing to do is get them out of the water before you provide any sort of medical care at all. Or if they're in an incredibly tight space, maybe you can't do anything to help them medically until you get them out of that tight space so that you can start medical care, which is contrary to street medicine where, you might have to get them on a backboard before you do anything to that patient. In cave rescue, the geometry of the passage often dictates the order in which you provide medical care, okay? So philosophically, the medical care really is, it's different. What you have to do is say, well, what is in the best interest of my patient, right? Because the environment can kill you, you got to say, okay, let's figure out what is the biggest threat to my patient. In this, like in the photo here, is it that the water is going to drown them first? Well, maybe I should get them out of the water before I deal with their broken arm or their fractured hip, because that loss of ability to breathe is going to kill them in a minute and a half versus, that broken pelvis, which might take a while for them to bleed out, right? And then the second issue here is that in many cases, cave rescue is an extended transport time. There are situations where even if a person is a short distance in a cave, it may take hours to get them out. In which case you have to treat them as if it's a backcountry scenario. You may not be able to get them blood. You may not be able to get them the drugs that they may need because it just might take them a long time to get out. And because it takes them a long time to get out, they can develop additional medical problems. Things like hypothermia, dehydration or hypohydration, and low blood sugar, hypoglycemia. These are kind of the three hypos, right? In most cases, our patients are going to have those three problems in addition to whatever was their main concern. Maybe they got a broken ankle. Well, if they're sitting in a cave and they're not really doing anything, they're going to get cold. And then when they get cold, they're going to burn up all of their glycogen stores in their bodies. And as a result, they're going to have low blood sugar, right? So because it's the backcountry environment, whatever their main medical condition may be, the environment's going to exacerbate it. That's just reality. Now, the cool thing about caving is that the vast majority of the patients that we see are fairly young, fairly fit, and they're mostly guys. So as a result, they lose heat a little bit slower than most ladies do because they have a lower surface area to volume ratio. And often that means that they can help in their own rescues, right? They're in shape people. They can do this, right? Unlike above ground, where, I mean, I've been involved in rescues where you have a 350-pound person who had no business going in the backcountry, and you got to carry them out. They're not in any condition to help their rescue. They're barely surviving as it is, right? So because of the average caver's demographics, in many cases the medical care can be a little bit less because those individuals can help in their own rescue. If we can move to the next.
Also, what above ground rescuers, it's foreign to them, is allow your patient to help the rescue. Don't put them in a litter right away. If they can move on their own, the less they're in a litter or sked, the safer it is for your rescue team, the safer it is for the person. If they can, in fact, I've known cavers that will crawl out on their hind end, just kind of inchworm backwards. They're moving, they're doing fine, they're generating body heat. Let them help with the rescue if possible. Whereas above ground, you find them, you grab them, you put them in a litter, and you take them down the mountain. Not so much in cave rescue. If they can help with their own rescue, that is really good. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can you move to the next slide? Thank you so much. So patient movement underground is also a pain. It's a colossal pain because the geometry of the cave passage itself can't really be modified. I mean, you can with things like microblasting and feather and wedges, but for the most part, the rock is the shape that the rock is. And so you can't just make it bigger. You can't make it flatter or wider or taller. You just kind of have to suck it up and deal. And as a result, rescuers have to find a way to move this big sack of meat through some pretty nasty locations. And these weird geometries of passage are simply foreign to above ground rescuers. At one point in time, I did a drill with Santa Clara County Search and Rescue where I said, hey, how are you guys at litter handling? And they said, oh, we're really fantastic. And then what I did is I ran them through an obstacle course that I created where I took them underneath boats and through this, a big warehouse with all sorts of crazy obstacles. And I showed them how to do things like lap passes and whatnot, pretty standard things that we do in caving. And their eyes got really, really big because they said, there are a lot of environments where we would normally just build a rope rescue system, but now we understand we can just carry the patient through this terrain. And that's one of the strengths of cave rescue is that we practice just manhandling patients over really rough terrain and through really awkward geometries. And so we have some really cool techniques. Lap passes are where you basically line the cave floor with rescuers. You just slide the litter and the patient over across your knees and your thighs. Works really, really well. Leapfrogging is where one group of people will be carrying and moving that litter, and people will move up to the front in front of the litter, and then they'll be handed off, or the litter will be handed off to those new individuals. Standing passes are where you might have a really ugly geometry of your cave passage, and you just stage rescuers along that path that the litter is going to move through, and you just hand that litter through the awkward geometry. And then one of my personal favorites is the turtle. This works really well for narrow passages that are fairly tall, where you literally just set the litter on top of one or two people's backs and they crawl as the people in the front and the back just stabilize the litter. And there are a lot of cave passages that this works really, really well in. But these are not techniques that you use above ground. And in fact, I was actually involved in a rescue a few years ago where we took a woman off of a ridge line, and we carried her down this really, really steep slope. And we had rescuers who were sliding down the slope and falling, and actually a couple people got injured in doing so. And a turtle would have worked perfect on this little narrow trail. And at the time, I was not aware of the technique, right? So I think this is one of the techniques that for above ground rescuers, I think that we as a caving community could offer you some really cool patient moving techniques to move your patients through weird terrains. Could I get the next slide, please? So as I mentioned before, the environment in a cave can do really nasty things to our patients. So it's important to shield the patient from that environment as much as possible. But there's a caveat to this, is that if it can harm the patient, it can also harm the rescuers. And what you're trying to do is get the patient out of the cave as fast as possible so the environment doesn't win. You know, because in that fight between the cave and the patient, the cave is always going to win, right? It's gonna find a way to slowly suck the energy out of your patient. So what you have to do is kind of modify whatever the treatment protocol is for the patient's injury or medical condition based on whatever the cave will allow you to do, and then get them out as fast as possible. Because not only is that necessary for the patient, but also for the rescuers. Most of my caves are fairly high alpine environments, and you don't want to be in there for a very long time because it's so cold. And you're burning so much energy in just keeping warm that you can't be in there too long, otherwise you will slowly get hypothermic. Right? It's very difficult to carry enough food to survive in those environments. And the same is true for a rescuer who is trying to move a patient through that environment. They're burning even more energy trying to move a patient. So particularly in those cold, wet caves, you really got to get them out fairly quickly because the cave is going to do a real number on the condition of both the patients and the rescuers. Now, there's another difference between above and below ground that's really stark if you play with either of these communities. And that is navigating through a cave. Above ground, there's a heavy usage with maps, compass, GPS coordinates, and now there's a number of technologies to speed up the deployment of teams into the field. And you have these really cool software packages that can do things like real-time map where all your teams are, what areas have been searched, etc. And these are great technologies for above ground. The problem is none of them really work underground, because in a cave, none of those digital technologies are really going to work. GPS certainly will not work. And a lot of the kind of real-time mapping programs require real-time transmission of data through some sort of wireless technology or GPS. So while a lot of SAR teams will kind of practice with these really cool technologies, below ground cave rescue simply can't. What we have are maps, cave maps, in some cases. In some cases, they're not even available. The trick, though, is that a caver will look at a cave map and they'll be able to read it, at least if it's at least decent cartography, which is sometimes not the case. But if you hand a cave map to a above ground rescuer, they're going to have a hard time being able to read it, or they may not even be able to read it at all, because they're used to playing with the maps that you see on the left of the screen here, the nice normal USGS topo map. And pretty much anyone who's done anything outside for any length of time has learned how to read a topographic map. But a cave map, like the one that you see on the right, man, that's a completely different beastie. You know, even for a caver, I'm going to take a couple minutes and really look at this, determine which passages are high, which ones are low, how high the passages are, the shape of the geometry of the passage. So even if you've got a really competent search and rescue team in your area, they may not even be able to understand the resources that we as cavers hand them in an actual cave rescue. So if you do happen to be on a team, please spend some time with some cavers and learn how to read these cave maps. They're actually pretty straightforward to read once you learn some basic symbols and how to read them. So there are a couple of things that the NSS and the National Cave Rescue Commission have available for people in the caving community, as well as people outside of the caving communities. So if you happen to be on a rescue team, I would highly recommend that you utilize your local cavers. And there are a couple reasons for this. Number one, they really know the local caves. They'll tell you which caves have bad air. They'll tell you the conditions inside the cave, whether or not they flood, whether or not maybe it's really muddy or it's really wet or it's safe to go in. And they also know how to move through a cave. And I remember the stark difference between the way I used to move through a cave, and then as I became more of a caver and I get underground more, you burn a lot of calories just flailing around when you're not used to moving in a cave. So if you've got a rescue team and you have access to cavers, please utilize them, because they can move through that environment way faster and more efficiently than non-cavers can. The other issue is that caving is an interesting community. We have a strong ethic of self-rescue and partner rescue. So a lot of cavers have some rescue training, and so they can be rolled into a call-out rescue relatively quickly in most cases, because they know how to work in a team, particularly a team underground. And they've got all the stuff they need to move through that cave. So all the harnesses, all the rigging equipment, they know how to ascend and rappel rope for those vertical caves out there. So if you happen to have a rescue or you want to pre-plan some rescues, what you can do is find your local grottos. You can do that on caves.org. And your local grotto will be happy to take you underground and show you how to cave. If you're cavers, please be welcoming to the rescuers. I have taken many rescuers underground, and it's always a come to Jesus moment when they realize that they can't take the same gear underground as they normally carry with them. So
oh yeah,
please.
It's really a wake-up call.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I saw one rescuer who he and his organization had decided that they could just handle all cave rescues in an area. And a friend of mine and I decided to take him underground. And the moment he got underground, he was like, okay, yeah, we can't do this. You know, it was maybe 2 minutes into the caving trip. We hadn't even gotten to a pitch yet. So, like, really, if you've got rescuers who are interested, please take them underground. They will rapidly realize the complexity of a cave rescue. But outside of other cavers, there are a bunch of things that the NSS has available as well. If I can get the next slide, please.
Well, I have a comment. We had some gentlemen come down from the North Country. They had been on a cave rescue and said it went well. They had no problem. You know, why do we need cavers? And they came down and were at orientation to cave rescue. And after they got in the cave and they were underground and they had to do a search, suddenly the brain fog set in. And Gretchen Baker, NCRC instructor, had them set up, you know, a 3-to-1. And these guys are very proficient above ground. They are very impressive. But underground, they were just kind of looking at each other going, how do we do that? And they could not remember how to set up a 3-to-1. So it's the stress of being in this strange culture. It's just it really is playing with your brain.
So, for those of you who are cavers or non-cavers, really, there is a group within the National Speleological Society called the NCRC, or National Cave Rescue Commission. It is a part of the NSS, and what it does is it trains. It's just a training organization, It provides very low cost rescue courses for people. And it can be for cavers and for agency personnel. The other thing that they do is they maintain lists of individuals who have been trained in cave rescue in a given region. So if you've got a cave rescue that's coming up, or you know of a cave rescue, you can give them a call and they'll tell you who is in your state, who is in your region, has some training and can be called out. They also maintain really big gear caches that are to be used underground. And these caches are awesome. They're spaced all around the country. I'm not sure. I think, Debbie, I'm not sure who's got it here in Utah. I assume it's probably around Andy's place. But
Yeah,
there are caches all around the U.S. and these caches are big. So if you need gear, and let me tell you, cave rescues often just consume equipment. If you give them a call, they can provide equipment for your cave rescues that can be kind of used and abused, which is fantastic. Now, the training that's offered through NCRC is bang for buck, the cheapest stuff you're going to find out there. And the reason why is because no one is paid. And what you have are some pretty phenomenal instructors across the United States who are, in many cases, really big names just in technical rescue across the United States. And they provide basically at-cost training. And so what a training that will on the open market cost you $3,500, $4,000 a week will cost you $300 or $400 or even $600. So either way you hack it, like it's incredibly cheap training, and it's for the most part quite high quality. The techniques that are used are continuously evaluated, and they do change over time as we get more data. We do have a lot of different instructors that provide testing data. Usually there's a very large contingent of NCRC instructors and leadership at the International Technical Rescue Symposium. And so the community is actively engaged in testing and equipment and technique improvement. And as a result, we have to kind of update our curriculum periodically. So what's important about this is that it's not a stagnant curriculum. It continuously improves over time, which is a really big deal. And it's important to note that because what used to be kind of gospel will become non-gospel a few years later as we get more data showing that a better technique is faster, more efficient, safer, has better safety margins, etc. Right. So I would encourage anyone that if you've learned something in the past about rescue, update yourself. You know, every few years, take a class. You know, do some reading. Keep studying all the time because things do change. Now, if you are interested in NCRC and the training they can provide, please go to ncrc.info. That's NCRC's webpage. It'll give you lists of where trainings are, where we're upcoming. There's some pretty fantastic trainings out there. For us in Utah, we usually have to travel somewhere else, but there's some pretty great trainings usually in the East every year, as well as one in Texas every year. And then there's a national seminar that kind of moves all around the country. And every time we go to a different training location, we bring gear caches there so we can train in that location. So the long and short of it is, if you've got a rescue organization, please use NCRC as a resource for trained volunteers as well as equipment. And if you don't need that stuff, but you would like to make friends with your local cavers, please use the NSS's webpage and go and find your local grotto and then go underground, because we love to take you underground. And with that, I think we can take whatever questions you may have.
Okay, well, Greg has a question. He says, National is here in New York this year and currently is still on. That may change due to the worldwide pandemic, but for now, it's still on. With this pandemic going on, as everybody knows, everything's kind of on hold. We're just kind of waiting, hanging out. as for the regular trainings, regionals now, we all know everything's on hold. It says we will reevaluate as we get more data. All right, so let's take questions. We've been talking all this time, and I'm sure we've kept everybody here this whole time, which is amazing. It says Tom has taught the 2 times. Oh, yeah, right. Tom, you want to read this one?
I don't
Okay,
actually.
it says Tom has taught the 2 times grippy, slippy, clippy concept. Would you describe the genesis of this idea?
Okay, so for those of you who have not heard me go on my rant, I will give you context, then I will explain what this question is referring to and how it came to be. So there is a class that the NCRC teaches called Small Party Assisted Rescue, where we teach people how to rescue yourself and others with minimal equipment and personnel. And it's been evolving for some time now. There have been many people involved. But what we've found is that basically all the systems that you can, or that we teach, can be built with very few pieces of equipment. And what I noticed is that you can do it with basically 2 carabiners, 2 rope grabs, and 2 pulleys. And so I would say this at trainings, and I think this was in Bend, Oregon one year, where there was some student who said, yeah, you know, it's what you really need is slippy things to let the rope just kind of slip. And then someone else said, well, yeah, you just need 2 grippy things to, you know, grab that rope. And then I was like, wait a minute. You mean you need 2 slippy, 2 grippy, and 2 clippy? Because you can clip with carabiners. And that kind of became the mantra, is that you can pretty much do all your rigging with a small party assisted rescue kit with 2 slippy things or 2 pulleys, 2 grippy things, 2 rope grabs, and 2 clippy things, 2 carabiner like objects. So it was actually a bunch of people at a training, and we were just kind of spitballing and you know, having fun, and it just kind of happened. And so it was just you know, hanging out in a training, screwing around. It's kind of the genesis.
That's very interesting. I had never thought about that, but it does make sense. All right, any more questions before we close up for the night? Okay, here we go. The spar versus above ground rigging. MRI teams tend to emphasize the 10-to-1, safety factor, redundancy, etc., which isn't always possible, practical underground. What are acceptable ways of accessing system factors for cave rescue?
Okay.
They always like the 10-to-1.
So I think there are, I've got a lot of thoughts on this matter, and that doesn't mean I'm right, and I don't speak for NCRC when I make these comments, by the way, but I will tell you what NCRC's kind of stated policy is. So this concept of a 10-to-1 static system safety factor is this idea that you want your system to be 10 times stronger than whatever the forces are that are placed on the system when things are static, when nothing is moving. And the idea is that it's really difficult to predict or model the dynamic forces involved in a rescue system. And so if you just have a really big safety factor, you don't have to worry about the complexity of engineering dynamics calculations. So what NCRC's policy is that you have to have a 7-to-1 static system safety factor for your rope rescue systems. And in SPAR, we fudge some of those rules sometimes if it's justified based on the medical condition of the patient. But that's to be avoided basically at all costs. Now, I'm going to take my instructor hat off and just talk about some testing data here. So I was interested in kind of static system safety factor calculations for hull systems. And I started testing full systems where I would build full hull systems and test them to failure And when I started the testing, everyone told me, "Oh yeah, we're looking at a 11 to 1, 10 to 1 static system safety factor." When I pull tested them, I was getting like 7.1 to 1 static system safety factors. So, and from what I understand about NCRC's policy is they changed to the 7 to 1 because that's actually what the systems are that they were using. So I guess my point here is that a lot of the static system safety factors you hear quoted for full systems in a technical rescue context, they're often not actually that static system safety factor. So here's how I personally rig, and this is the world according to Tom, having nothing to do with the NSS or the NCRC, is you make a determination based on your patient's needs. If you've got a patient that is in a warm, dry cave and it's big open borehole and they've got a broken ankle, yeah, take forever and a year. Don't break any safety rules. There's no reason to. If you've got a patient who's got, a broken arm, a broken leg in an alpine cave where the water is slowly rising, am I going to do something a little more risky? I'm more likely to do so, but it's going to be a calculated risk, depending on if I actually honestly believe I can do a maneuver safely. But that's just me personally. So yeah, I guess that's my 2 cents on static system safety factors.
Well, thank you. All right. Let's see. Any other questions? Because we are at top of the hour now. If you don't have any more questions, we will go ahead and end. And then please email us. You can go to the NSS website and find the email address there. Tom has his email address. It's do you mind if I give you your email address?
Sure, go ahead.
Or you can give your email address.
It's cavertevans@gmail.com. That's CAVERT and then EVANS@gmail.com.
And Tom would have a lot of the best information. If you go to his website, the SAR3, the SAR cubed, that has a lot of data, a lot of really good, just analytical information, and also information for teaching classes in that. I pulled many things off there for things I was teaching. A lot of great information. Well, everybody, thank you very much for attending. And Tom, thank you for spending your time and helping. We will go ahead and end this for tonight. This is recorded and will be stored on the NSS website of caves.org. Probably take about 24 hours or so to get it up. Our incredible webmaster, Alex, has been doing miracles this last couple of days with getting these up really quickly. This we felt it was important to give. If you have any topics that you think would be good for webinars, let us know. If you have a good presentation, or if you've gone on a great trip, or you have a grotto project or a regional project, we would love to hear from you, especially at this time when everybody's housebound and we're going into cave withdrawals. Now would be a good time for people to step up and offer to give presentations, because now is a time when you have time. So please take pity on your fellow cavers and let's have some trip reports. Let's have some grotto projects that have happened over the years. We need to keep in touch with all of our cavers and keep our community going. So please be kind, and doing a webinar is painless. We will help you with everything you need. Anyway, everybody have a good night. Please be safe. Stay home until this craziness is over. And everybody cave safely. Have a good night, and thank you very much.